want to send a warm welcome to you all. My name is Noah Gokul. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the program manager at IDHA. I'm going to do a brief visual description. I'm a brown, non-binary person of color. I have mid-length black hair. Tonight I have my pink glasses on. I have a black turtleneck and a brown shirt over that. And so we are here for decarcerating care, the pathologizing of resistance. Before we get into our discussion, I'll run through some slides just to ground us. So well, I wanted to start off this acknowledgement with, a brief just grounding and real, foundation of inviting people to show up in however they're showing up tonight, and acknowledging the grief that people may be feeling from all of the ongoing genocide in Palestine, Sudan, Congo, and other places in the world, and all of the individual grief that brings as well. And this was a acknowledgement that was directly inspired by Umu Saila, who helps contribute to that. So thank you, Umu. So we have closed captioning available for our event tonight. You can click the show captions button to turn this feature on. We also have access to a full live transcript. So you can go ahead and click that on as well to view it. And we also have our lovely ASL interpretation available. We're joined by Kat and Monica, who are featured in the video here. So for tech, we have some people supporting for tech. So we have Jessie, who is helping with tech. You can reach out to her with any technical difficulties. We're also recording this panel to share with registrants later. So feel free to, if you need to end early, you can pop out and we'll be able to get that recording to you. We also are inviting you to join in the chat, like people already started, to kind of share how this conversation is resonating with you. But yeah, I just want to uplift that the chat is very active often, so attuned to your access needs. You can click the chat button to hide chat completely if it's too much. We also will be sending out the anonymized transcript of the chat after. And also wanting to note, this is a webinar, so panelists will not be able to answer additional questions that may arise, but we're going to save any questions that we are received in the chat, and we hope to engage with them beyond this panel. So briefly wanted to share about IDHA, the Institute for Development of Human Arts. We are a community of current and prior mental health service users and survivors, psychiatrists, psychologists, and other clinicians, activists, and artists who come together to transform mental health care. And we advance critical, effective, and scalable alternative approaches to mental health through collaborative education and community development. And we are unique by integrating the experiential and academic knowledge. We challenge the idea that only those who work in the fields of mental health are the experts, shifting power dynamics in a system that generally only privileges professional experience. So our community agreements for tonight that we would appreciate you being in abiding to shared expertise and wisdom, that everyone brings their own expertise, that we want to gain in respect from everyone's different expertise, collective liberation, that overcoming oppression aids everyone's liberation. So we're in the spirit of solidarity, holding each other accountable in this space, and that we listen like allies. We respect a wide diversity of choices and perspectives, and we don't want to invalidate each other's experiences. And I also will be helping out with the chat moderation. So yeah, we'll be attuning to the chat to make sure we're abiding by these community agreements. We also want to acknowledge conflict and harm because we really expect a lot of different opinions in this space and disagreements. So community agreements are designed to help navigate these moments. During the panel, we invite you to also notice, how do you feel tension in your body? Is this from learning new ideas that challenge you? Is this because someone said something or done something in the space that reinforces oppression? There's also a link in the chat to IDHA's response form where you can report harm in the space if you'd like the IDHA team to address. And we want to give a shout out to Spring Up for developing and helping with this language. For panel follow-up, we'll be doing an email that includes the panel recording, closed caption transcript, chat transcript, which is anonymized, a reading and resource list, how to stay in touch with the panelists, and a panel feedback form. Just in a moment, I'll be introducing Kimberlee, who is our moderator tonight, and we'll be hearing a few words from Kimberlee, and then we'll be doing some panelist introductions, and then doing the discussion as well as ending in a Q&A. So I think that's the last slide. Yes, that is. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to our lovely moderator tonight, Kimberlee, who is a doctoral student in clinical psychology. She's a Virgo sun, Scorpio moon. Also is an amazing IDHA member and organizer for the Decarcerating Care Committee, and has been helping with the organization of this event for the last few months. So welcome, Kimberlee, and thank you so much for moderating our event.
Thank you so much, Noah. Good evening, everyone. It is my honor and pleasure to serve as the moderator for this evening's conversation about psychologizing resistance with the brilliant minds of panelists and everyone tuning in. So my name is Kimberlee Lalane, and I use she, they pronouns. For a visual description, I am a Black, Haitian, femme-presenting person with kinky, curly Black hair styled in an afro with bangs. I'm also wearing a Black turtleneck and round glasses. And behind me is a neutral wall where you can slightly see a lamp and a cat tower in the frame. Like mentioned before, I am a second-year doctoral student in clinical psychology, and I'm calling in from the land historically stewarded by the Osage and the Monongahela peoples, colonially known as Western Pennsylvania. Like many of us who are joining this conversation, I entered this space with profound grief over the ongoing genocide and colonial struggles and crises happening in Palestine, Sudan, Congo, Haiti, and beyond. I want to acknowledge and honor the pain that many are experiencing and channel that grief, rage, and love into our cross-movement action for collective liberation. And as we confront the weight of collective heaviness and solidarity, it is imperative to recognize how this pain intersects with broader historical and contemporary contexts. Hegemonic psychology and the mental health industrial complex have a vested interest in protecting colonial narratives to justify the domination and imposition of Western values and systems. And the implications of this are profound and extend from historical context to contemporary times. Western psychiatry and psychology subscribe to highly medicalized model that leverages diagnosis as a way to exercise control over marginalized people and communities. They establish control by defining so-called desired social behavior, medicalizing perceived deviance, and depoliticizing stress. And these taxonomies privilege the oppressor, the white Western male, and situate knowledge produced by the oppressed, those who are otherwise, as inferior. And when examining history it becomes evident the numerous ways that colonial Western-like disciplines have been mobilized to advance colonial nation building and how they create and uphold norms of what is considered a, quote, civilized society. These dynamics contribute to the justification of mental health approaches rooted in force, criminalization, and othering, causing deep and ongoing harm to people and communities who identify as mad, disabled, or neurodivergent. One of the tactics deployed by the broader field is the pathologization of those who challenge the capitalist and colonial status quo. For example, the mental health field labeled individuals who sought to escape chattel slavery in antebellum South with drapetomania, and diagnosed Black activists engaged in civil rights movement with schizophrenia, also known as protest psychosis. And these oppressive colonial legacies continue to play out in the present day. For instance, Aaron Bushnell's self-immolation, intended as a powerful act of solidarity with Palestinian liberation, has instead been pathologized, conceived as irrational, insane, and beyond reason. And many have decontextualized and depoliticized his actions by labeling it as a suicide. And similarly, immunocompromised, chronically ill, and COVID-cautious individuals have been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD for continuing to mask amid an ongoing pandemic, a mass death event that the CDC continually downplays the threat and long-term harm of in service of prioritizing capitalist accumulation. And through dominant regimes of authority and so-called expert opinion, the psych disciplines fail to examine power while simultaneously producing and disseminating knowledge that purports to define what is universally healthy and normal. Therefore, existing mental health services are rooted in and will continue to perpetuate dehumanizing, racialized, and colonial violence unless we act to disrupt it. Tonight, our panelists will review the historical and contemporary manifestations of how the mental health industrial complex pathologizes resistance, demonstrating how it is tied to systems of white supremacy, capitalism, and colonialism. They'll uplift strategies, tools, and wisdom to help us navigate toward collective liberation and healing as we translate our obtained knowledge into praxis beyond tonight's event. We encourage you to engage in this conversation by using the chat to share your thoughts, feelings, and reactions, as well as resources for continued learning for collective growth. And without further ado, I extend a warm welcome to our panelists. For a friendly reminder, please name yourself before speaking. I invite you to share your pronouns, a visual description, and a brief introduction about you and your connection to tonight's topic. To start off, why don't we begin with Hannah?
Hello, everybody. My name is
the interpreter, respectfully requesting that everybody slow down just a little bit, especially with names and acronyms and places for access. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Hannah Throssell. I use she, her pronouns, and as a descriptor, I have black hair and a red stripe. I'm wearing metal glasses. My hair is about mid-length, and I'm wearing a black top. Hello, everybody. My name is Hannah Throssell. I come from the Tohono Nation in southern Arizona and the Dene Nation in northern Arizona. I'm currently a Master of Social Work student at Columbia University. I'm planning to graduate this May in the next couple of weeks. I'm very excited for that. I was asked to do this panel as from an Indigenous perspective here in North America. I'm an enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe. In addition to that, I acknowledge various Indigenous identities. I suppose what pulled me to want to contribute to this topic was myself being an enrolled member of the Tohono Nation, and living along colonial borderlands. My tribe is currently under occupation via the United States Border Patrol, as we are on the US and Mexico border, and we deal with checkpoints to go in and out of our reservation, which I'll talk more about throughout the panel. Aside from that, it's an absolute honor to be here, and thank you, and I'll pass it on to the next panelist.
Hannah, thank you for your introduction. It's lovely to have you join us and your personal connection to this topic. Gina, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Gina. Pronouns are they, them. I'll go into a visual description. I have black curly hair with dark features, eyebrows, and eye colors, dark brown with a lighter complexion, wearing a keffiyeh and a black button up with a gold chain. Yeah, I'm super excited to be joining everyone tuning in from occupied Tonga land, also known as Los Angeles, California. As my work as a therapist and a PhD student in decolonial psychology, it's really like bringing together my commitment to like liberation struggles and also what it means to intertwine that within mental health, and really looking at the intersections between all of that. And also like as a queer person and Arab person, like my own personal connection to this is really what's also informing my own work as being the personal is political and the political is personal. So I'm really looking forward to today. So thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Your presence is well appreciated, and your radical provider role and personal connections will be an essential perspective for today's conversation. Idil, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Hi, and good evening, everyone. My name is Idil Abdillahi, and I'll do a visual description first. I'm a Black woman with a bald head. I'm wearing a sort of circle framed glasses. I have on earrings, which if I turn, you'll see them. They're like gold, small gold studs. And I'm wearing a black sweater, black sweater, with a keffiyeh draped over my shoulders, with a necklace that has my name on it. That if I sit back, you can see maybe, but not if I'm so close. And a black, completely black background. My pronouns are she, her. I'm here today to really just speak to and share and support the important discussion that's happening today. In my professional role, I'm an assistant professor in the School of Disability Studies at Toronto Metropolitan University, cross-appointed to the School of Social Work. Much of my work and research is in the area of MAD studies, particularly at the intersection of race and anti-Blackness. So I'm really excited to be here to come in concert with my colleagues to amplify and support. Of course, I think the struggle for Palestinian lives, and also to just add my own perspective in terms of just witnessing what's been happening. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Idil. We're grateful for your presence and your valuable perspective on this subject. Sasha, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name's Sasha Warren. I am calling in from Minneapolis, Minnesota, unceded Dakota Territory. And visual description, I'm a white guy with short brown hair, brown eyes. I've got a little bit of stubble today, wearing a black button-up shirt, and I've got some gold and silver triangular earrings in. My tie to the event today, I'm a former psychiatric patient and current mental health worker in a sort of clubhouse adjacent space here in Minneapolis. And I've also been doing a kind of independent research on the history of psychiatry and psychiatric power for like 10 years, kind of stemming from my interest both in former experiences, but also just a lifetime commitment to radical politics. So this topic is right at the intersection of things I'm interested in, and I'm happy to be taking part. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha, so much for your introduction. It's wonderful to have you here. And Salma, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Hi, my name is Samah. I'm from Jerusalem, but today I'm calling you from my clinic in Nablus. It's already the 26th of April, 1:22 a.m. The time here. It's quite late. I'm wearing my favorite colors, a blue shirt and a pink headscarf. And behind me is a plain white wall. I'm a psychiatrist and the head of mental health services at the Palestinian Ministry of Health. I supervise mental health activities in the West Bank mainly. And I work with the population of Jerusalem, where I come from. And I used to go frequently to Gaza to work with the population there. I'm really excited to be with you today. That's why I'm staying for such a late hour. And I think that the topic is very necessary and relevant to the ongoing struggle, not only in Palestine, but all over the world, especially with the promising movement of American students, in the United States nowadays. I think the topic becomes more important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sama, for introducing yourself. It's truly a pleasure to have you here with us, especially given your connection to the topic. So also, I just wanted to extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone for sharing such insightful introductions. It's really great to have each of you here. And I appreciate you taking the time to join us. The first question I want to pose to everyone is, how have you understood, witnessed, or personally experienced the mental health field being leveraged to silence political dissent or protest? Anyone who feels called to can go first.
Well, I can say a few things, if I may, if no one wants to start before me. Where I come from, we have different mental health systems. Palestinian mental health system, Israeli mental health system, and a dominant Western mental health system. But even within the Palestinian system, many people are influenced by Western mental health point of view. And I think I will give some examples from Palestine. The overemphasis on neutrality and impartiality that keeps people quiet about the structure, the political violence, and the conditions that create pathology within individuals is a way to silence people, to silence activists, and to silence advocates, and anyone who has a human right approach to health in general and mental health. And even the silencing is not only through overemphasizing neutrality and, I would say, misunderstanding and misrepresentation of the meaning of neutrality and impartiality. Sometimes professionals who speak against this get censored. They are exposed to hearings. We have a current example of what's happening for the prominent professor, Dr. Nadira Shalhoub-Koverkian from the Hebrew University, who's being now accused for her statements that challenge the status quo and the politics. So I would start with this introduction and leave room for my colleagues to bring up more examples.
I can jump in. Gina speaking. So one of the things that comes up for me is how within like Western mental health, there's this way in which we pathologize rage and anger. Anger, especially being categorized as this very like racialized emotion, and who gets to actually express anger. When anger is a response to a clear boundary violation, to being colonized, to living under oppression, anger as the emotion that helps us to move, to take action, to resist. And the question becomes, what is there to resist if you're being told that it's all in your head, or that somehow the system has your best interest? And that the mental health field is leveraged to funnel fascism by upholding white supremacy and coloniality under the guise of healing. And that this is done by depoliticizing mental health, and also saying that if something doesn't, under hyper-individualism, if something doesn't directly affect you, then it's not your problem. And that this is absolutely the antithesis to community, because this is the core paradigm of what constitutes trauma work and healing, especially within Western society, that it's not about creating community or seeing these systems for what they are, or in how they perpetuate and create cycles of pain and suffering, and even for generations, or to build capacity and tools to fight and to resist, but to actually continue to individualize our problems. And we're told, especially like as a therapist early on, that politics don't belong in therapy, and that to even assert that your issues could be connected to capitalism or ableism or colonization, it's already assumed that this is not the appropriate place to work that out. So let's bring it back to you. Let's bring it back to you as an individual. How do you handle your uncomfortable emotions? That it's the personal responsibility of the individual, and not the systems at play that are creating these conditions, or even the responsibility of the provider to witness you and join you. And that the mental health provider reinforces that your individual feeling and perception is more important than resistance, and that the only person that you're responsible for, again, is yourself. And because resistance requires a politic of relationality, how do we do that if our conceptualization of this is funneled through a colonial mental health system that continues to only prioritize the self?
It's Idil speaking. Maybe I'll just add to that a bit. I just have some notes written, so I'm just going to be reading from them. I think the response that I have is like essentially by the impetus in which it was created, like both of my other colleagues on the panel have like articulated really well. And that's by the profound and well-documented and evidenced historical legacy, which is in Euro-Western biomedicine, more broadly, and in psychiatry acutely, that illustrates the manufacturing of illness, which is then translated into the manufacturing of diagnostic criteria, the creation of categories of crazy people, quote, crazy people, communities, behaviors, thoughts, ideas, etc. And this becomes entrenched by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM. The manual then becomes the tool that simultaneously creates and defines the problem and is used to dictate and offer treatment. So I understand the mental health system and psychiatry as already and inherently a mechanism to silence political protest and dissent, insofar as the behaviors and human responses that it seeks to manage are those that are deemed disruptive, disturbing, dangerous, and outside of the norm. And so in that context, there's very little room, I think, to not begin the conversation without understanding how some of this logic plays out. So in doing so, I think it's important for us to acknowledge the dominant functions of the mental health system, its need to control, contain, cure, and correct, along with the commingling of increasingly carceral tools and technologies masked as care, which ultimately seek to incarcerate. I often think about what is concerning for me, among many other things, is the expansion of mental health and psychiatry into policing. And by this, I mean how we use medicine and medical interventions and the potential or alleged need for them as a vehicle and entry point into carceral systems, and as a tool for treatment. So really simple examples of this, really simple examples of this can be seen in how the mental health system and its practitioners, as stated by my colleagues, respond to behaviors that might be deemed disruptive or inappropriate. And it's often, but not always, to surveil, to isolate, to medicate, to calm down, to limit, to suspend legal rights, to weaponize the law, legal and policy apparatuses to intervene and allegedly protect and penalize. In sanctioned sites of care, such as hospitals and other kinds of congregate settings, we also see tactics such as restraints, be it two-point restraints, not dissimilar to handcuffs used, not dissimilar to handcuffs used by police, but used differently, or entire body restraints, such as Houdini restraints, including but not limited to the use of things such as spit hoods, mouth cages, and feet ties. These are all tactics that historically were informed by how police and other penal agents treated those that they captured or sought to capture. And I think really quickly, just a quick final point on that is we also sort of now begin to hear an increasing rhetoric, mental health rhetoric and discourse from police services, particularly around the issue of protest and how they describe protesters deploying language that is most commonly used and described as pathologizing, right? So language around rage, being unhinged, dangerous and irrational. This is to signal to the public that, quote, those people protesting over there are a risk to public safety. And I think more importantly, that those protesters over there, quotes, are potentially can be a safety risk to others as well. And so, of course, this further extends into how police treat protesters and make okay whatever violent indignities they exercise on them. This is not only because they dare to dissent, but also because the idea of those, also because of the idea that those who protest must be deserving of violence because they are or must be deranged, quote unquote, and uncontrollable people. This narrative further becomes solidified when state officials reinforce that discourse and will respond to people in this way. So I'll go ahead and just leave it there for now. Thank you.
I can share and answer this question now. This is Hannah speaking. And so this question calls me specifically, I speak from my own experience, having been in a mental hospital, as well as choosing to go into this work that is social work in the behavioral health field, but also coming from an Indigenous North American perspective. This question immediately reminded me of the Declaration of Independence, and in which, I don't know if anybody here, at least in America, has read the Declaration of Independence from like history class and such. But Indigenous people in North America, we refer to as merciless Indian savages. That's what the writers of the Declaration of Independence referred to Native Americans as, and then thus justified the conquest of this country through manifest destiny, which brought its own wrath of just genocide and many other toxic histories inflicted upon my people, and probably globally amongst Indigenous people around the world. Anyways, but it reminded me also of Indian Health Services, which for those that aren't aware, Native Americans, we do receive free healthcare, which was worked out through us signing over our land and through treaties. And presently, the Indian Health Services only serves federally recognized members, but it's also just the most basic healthcare that one can ask for. It's not of high quality. The funding is constantly always being renegotiated as well. And additionally, for folks that don't know, Indian Health Services used to be under the Department of War. in tangent, I'm thinking of the Bureau of Indian Education, which also is under the Department of War. So essentially education and healthcare, both of these things were used coincidingly to colonize Indigenous peoples. And I think we still see the effects of that specifically within Native communities. We see disparities of high rates of substance use, high rates of depression and addiction, potentially misdiagnoses of schizophrenia, but also I, as an Indigenous person wanting to do behavioral health work, I'm also recognizing that I think these new diagnoses are also conditions of post-colonial times. But I would also argue that we still are in colonial times. It just has shifted, at least here in the West, where it's not physical, but it's through the Western biomedical system, education, and of course, conditions of capitalism. And I'll pass it on to the next panelist.
Yeah, maybe I can pick up on a thread, actually, I think that Hannah just spoke to briefly. I want to add as just a supplementary kind of complicating fold, this idea that I don't think pathologization is necessarily like a simple process or a simple tool. I think there's complicating folds to it, and ways that it plays out in sort of contradictory ways in actual localized conditions. I want to start out, as I feel like I always should, by quoting Fanon, who I'll quote liberally probably throughout this webinar, in his letter to a resident minister from 1956, which is when he's giving his resignation to the Hospital Blida Joinville. It's fantastic, one of the greatest texts, I think, in the history of psychiatry. But Fanon says, if psychiatry is the medical technique that aims to enable man no longer to be a stranger in his environment, I owe it to myself to affirm that the Arab, permanently an alien in his own country, lives in a state of absolute depersonalization. And he continues, the events in Algeria are the logical consequence of an abortive attempt to de-cerebralize a people. I think he's referring to a couple things here. One, just the immediate psychic and physiological effects of colonial violence. And on the other hand, medicine and specifically psychiatry's strategic relationship to the potential base of users. And this latter question is not just a discursive question. It really has to do with who is considered a worthy object of psychiatric contemplation and intervention, and of what type. So there's different levels. Though we tend to think of psychiatry as a unified field with unified aims and unified ends, there is a world of difference between, for instance, forensic psychiatry's treatment and conception of a sociopath and I speak within quotes here, in a high security prison versus a community psychiatrist treatment of, let's say, like a stock trader with depression. And there's a third component that comes in from another Fanon text in Wretched of the Earth, where he says the terms the settler uses when he mentions the native are zoological terms. When the settler seeks to describe the native fully in exact terms, he constantly refers to the bestiary, hordes of vital statistics, hysterical masses, faces bereft of all humanity. And here I have to follow this up by quoting from October, the defense minister in Israel, Yoav Gallant, who said, "We are fighting human animals, and we act accordingly." And Netanyahu said not too long after that, "Israeli soldiers understand the scope of their mission. They are ready to take action at any time in order to defeat the bloodthirsty monsters who have risen against us to destroy us." With these three things, I think we can identify three contradictory facets of pathologization from what I've taken from Fanon here. One, we refer to the real psychic and physiological damage wrought by colonial violence and the reality of occupation. Two, the reification of that damage done as an inherent or sort of independently standing biological psychiatric medical condition, as if it's emerging from some constitutional feature. And three, the reduction of the colonized mind to the level of the animal, below pathologization, below where it's even possible to go mad, where they're imagined and figured as non-psychical beings, pure instinct, impulsive, animalistic. The first, the real psychic damage is of course a reality, but it's constantly mediated in the colonial context through the latter two things, the reification process. The second, this pathologization that we're kind of meeting about, is a useful way to frame someone you wish to ignore or to silo, or just to kind of come up with a useful explanation, but more importantly for the settler to relieve their guilt and make them feel as though what the suffering they're seeing on the street or in the occupied territories is not directly related to occupation, but is because of various constitutional defects. And the third is how you characterize someone you want to put into a cage or eliminate altogether. It is a contradiction, though, because whenever you refer to one, and the first one, the real damage, and it's constantly necessary to do so, even for from the like mainstream psychiatric position, you can't help but refer to something about the occupation. So the occupation becomes visible, even though no matter how hard they try to avoid it. So because today the topic is about the pathologization of resistance, though, I want to end my little spiel about saying that it's vital to make clear that in the eyes of the settler colonist, the mere existence of the colonized person, the native, is already resistance to the program, whether they do anything at all or not. What the settler prizes above all is land as a property title. Those who live on land in an active relationship are already monsters by default and have to be destroyed. This is the cynical basis of these feverish visions of Hamas hiding in tunnels under hospital, or that every breathing being in Gaza is already a militant in hiding. It works as a cynical mask over the truth, but it's ultimately convincing to many, including settlers abroad, like in the United States, because it's a projection of their own fears of counterviolence, of what someone might do to them because of what they've done, that they'll face punishment ultimately for the enormous violence that supports their everyday life. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your insightful responses. What a great way to open dialogue in how the mental health field has been utilized to suppress political opposition of colonial ways of knowing. And your reflections underscore the complexity of the issue and the need to ground ourselves in the historical and contemporary context to grasp the pervasiveness of the ongoing impact over time. And this leads well into our next question, which is for Sama. You have written about how psychiatric classifications have historically been misused to oppress marginalized, oppressed groups. Can you share a few brief examples of this? And drawing a line to present day, how is resistance and political protests pathologized by the mental health system in Palestine right now?
I have always criticized enforcing the contours of the Palestinian experience into ready diagnostic codes. I want to tell you that many of the NGOs who provide mental health response to Palestinians who suffer, many of them suffer from grief or social distress. In order to have access to the NGO, you need to get a diagnostic code. So it's common to give the code of PTSD to many Palestinians. And even if sometimes people go to these institutions seeking social help, financial support sometimes, but in order to get access, you have to get a diagnosis. So that's one example. I want also to share the experience of mental health professionals within the Israeli system who tried to ignore the occupation by creating false normalization. Actually, one example is the course on cultural sensitivity in mental health that was meant to be at Ariel University. Ariel University is built in the suburb of Nablus on settlement land. And there is a university in a settlement who wants to teach a course on cultural sensitivity, transcultural sensitivity. So here, mental health is being used to blur the vision of people, to do laundry of the occupation and settlement. Israelis are known to host international mental health conferences, and some Palestinians and mental health professionals in solidarity with Palestinians have objected to these international conferences taking place in occupied land because Palestinians will not have access to these conferences, and also their friends who can arrive to the airport in Tel Aviv, and they can be deported. I want to give an example of the well-known person who was on hunger strike several times, Khadr Adnan. He freed himself 5 times because he used hunger strike against his administrative detention. And finally, he was left in his cell to die. And when he died, Israeli media described death as suicide. Suicide, the word suicide bomber or suicide attacks have been always used against Palestinians participating in resistance. Even the efforts of some youth to participate in the March of Return in Gaza, those acts were described by international Western media as suicide. Recently, we heard Shmuel, Ayelet Shmuel, an Israeli therapist, expert on trauma, describing the entire population in Gaza as sociopath. This over-pathologization, or the real hyper-visibility about the mental health impact on Palestinians, actually it's hypo-visibilizing the political problem. It is blurring the vision about the factors that create the rage, the resistance. And this is part, okay, I'm giving some examples from in the field of mental health, but this is in coherence with how media and politicians portray a profile for Palestinians and representations for Palestinians. Palestinians are affected by Orientalism, that was explained by Edward Said. Another form of prejudice against Palestinians is the overwhelming Islamophobia in the West. And there is also a special prejudice against Palestinians that is founded in the denial of the Palestinian narrative, the denial of the Nakba. Actually, there is a law in Israel that penalizes people who talk about the events of the Nakba, the genocide of the ethnic cleansing that took place in 48 and resulted in displacing 2/3 of the Palestinians out of their land and taking over 2/3 of historical Palestine. Denial still continues. Denial and gaslighting. For example, spreading stories about 40 decapitated children, beheaded children, the lies about UNRWA. And then, in order to stand up for these accusations, the burden will be on Palestinians who are already overwhelmed in their daily life, going about their daily life, searching for personal security. So lies, propaganda, gaslighting is made to create negative representations. When Western media reported on the events of October the 7th, everyone was talking about Palestinian envy and Palestinian hatred, as if there is no story of 75 years of colonization. So I think that the mental health system is part of the system. And the hegemonist system in mental health is part of the Western ideology that is involved in dehumanizing Palestinians and denying their rights, denying their narrative, denying their history. And that's the thing, the special thing about Palestinian trauma. It's not only, we cannot reduce it to a trauma to many individuals and describe it with the same construct as PTSD. PTSD best describes the experience of a soldier after going back to his safe land with the re-experiencing and hypervigilance and nightmares and so on. But in the Palestinian experience, the attack on memory, on history, on identity, on representations, the damage to the social fabric that is taking place cannot be described by terms like PTSD. I want to quote Gottlieb, one of the Knesset members, who rationalized using starvation as another tool to annihilate Palestinians. She says something to the effect, without starving Palestinians and cutting water and medicine, we cannot bribe them. We cannot create collaborators among them. So it is about destroying the social fabric, the capital of the Palestinian people. Now, those experiences, this kind of trauma, which is colonial and deliberate and man-made and engineered to inject the utmost harm on the Palestinian individual and also the Palestinian community and the Palestinian spirit. It goes, there are no words, no constructs in Western psychiatry that can describe it faithfully and fully. So I think it is, and when we Palestinians try to describe our experience, usually our description is shunned away, like it is dismissed as gray literature. It's not randomized control studies, because we have no time and no money and no peace to make randomized control study. But that's not a reason to dismiss our knowledge. It is important to synthesize knowledge from our experience. And I have always called upon people to join Palestinians in this important work. You know, now there are, the international community was so quick to receive and react to the lies created against the UNRWA and to stop financing the UNRWA services. While now the world is seeing, watching how Palestinians dig the mass graves to get the dead bodies out of mass graves. And there is denial of our experience and of our narrative and of the evidences that are brought and in Palestine by Palestinians. So that's part of how we, in the mental health field, how we react to this situation and how we try to challenge hegemonous mental health, the hegemony of mental health profession. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sama, for your response, your clear explanation of how Western psychology pathologize Palestinians when participating in resistance in numerous ways, such as getting diagnosed with eating disorders for engaging in hunger strikes, PTSD, and as a sociopath deeply resonated with me. And particularly, I appreciated your discussion on questioning what constitutes healthy behavior if most Palestinians are pathologized as mentally ill. So it emphasizes the importance, especially for those of us who are in the imperial core, to dissect power dynamics in our work and to center perspectives from the global South and maintaining a global perspective and international perspective in our critical analysis. So thank you so much. The next question is for Sasha. In what ways does psychiatry relate to the state? What is the significance of this in a time when we are seeing mental health weaponized to silence political protest.
Thanks, Kimberlee. Yeah, this is Sasha. And yeah, I want to start off by saying that if psychiatry works in some relationship to the state, I want to kind of underscore, and I'll come back to more of the reasons why later, I think, that it's this relationship is very uneasy, that it's not a, they're not conjoined maybe in a way that they used to be. And I think this is somewhat to our advantage. That over the 20th century, the field of psychiatry has fragmented itself largely on purpose in order to operate in fields where it was previously unable. It needed to break its connection to the asylum, which was a highly centralized space with a very close relationship with laws regulating institutionalization. But in order to get deeper and deeper into the community and deeper into international or global psychiatric relations, it had to break its very, very close relationship with its beloved central space, which it still has, and it has many other central spaces. But now this is the kind of the framework for which psychiatry has been able to incorporate itself very deeply in everyday language, schools, you know, even just kind of street encounters. It's much more democratized now. And also another fragment that kind of comes in, or a contradictory aspect of psychiatry that comes in, is four out of, or quite a few of the panelists have some position within the mental health field. I can't imagine the same thing, a similar panel being held for like corrections officers, for instance, or police officers. And I think that that does speak to a house, that this is a house divided against itself, that psychiatry on the whole has been oriented towards a kind of carceral mode, as people have pointed out. But there is this principle at its founding, as founding in a very not serious way, but it is a principle nevertheless in the what we call like the bourgeois revolutions, or the democratic revolutions, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, where kind of a core principle of psychiatry in its founding was that the mentally ill should not be culpable for crimes and have to be treated with care rather than confinement. You know, this has never been taken seriously. It's globally failed this mission, but it still points to a kind of a rift or an opening. And I think we have to pay attention to these rifts and openings because they're points that can be exploited. They're points that can be taken up and used to drive the system quicker to its own destruction. So I think it's that's kind of a general, maybe theoretical point I want to insist on, that we have to pay attention to these points of contradiction and the points of fragmentation, because they give us strategic advantages to act. But it also points to the fact that psychiatric power is quite diffuse. The label of madness is quite diffuse, and it's not, it doesn't have any one direct purpose. It can concentrate around a person who gets the label, kind of notions of pity or concern in some cases, while in a forensic psychiatric case, adding the word mad to criminal seems to paradoxically increase the sanction and disgust against the person. I can point to somebody in the States like Eileen Wuornos as kind of an extreme example of someone who got the label madness on top of criminal, and it didn't exculpate the crime. It didn't make people say, oh, she was mad, so therefore she should be innocent. It made her even more guilty, more monstrous, and more alien to the human community. These are people who are like beyond criminal and enter the realm of the monstrous or the ununderstandable. There's also the point that historically speaking, if you're looking at it from a purely quantitative perspective, this is true in the antebellum United States. It's true during the reign of Andrew Jackson. It's for Native people in the United States. And it's true in the history of colonial institutionalization, that psychiatric institutionalization has always been the least used of the state's mechanisms for controlling a colonized population, when, you know, there's much more kind of directly useful tools: prisons, deportations, checkpoints, and outright violence. Psychiatric incarceration has been much less used technique in this array of extreme, more violent or directly controlling techniques. So the question, if that's true, the question is to ask then why, if those other tools serve the social order so well, who is it for? For instance, an American psychiatrist calling Palestinian militants like insane or sociopathic, or individualizing the social suffering of colonized people as a mental health crisis in that territory, it's not going to have a direct effect on that person. So what's the purpose of that discourse? Why are they saying it at all? And I think you can point to, it helps to reinforce a difference, first of all, a gulf between us and them. It paints a picture of a global problem child where psychiatric experts from the West appear as a kind of global all-knowing parent figure. And of a group of people who can't seem to figure out their own business because of like constitutional defects or re-traumatization. It paints this kind of false complexity about what is to be done and reinforces this idea that only technocratic experts could possibly understand. So finally, though, I want to say kind of emphatically and as clearly as possible that in the colonial situation, really anything goes. Colonial psychiatry will bend over backwards and use completely irrational logic to achieve its goal of dehumanizing the native population. In the 1940s, psychiatrists said that Muslims in the colonies were less likely to be insane because their mental architecture was too primitive, and yet they weren't also normal. So they said that they're not mad on an individual level, but in respect to what's normal, that is like white Christians, they were all abnormal. So this is kind of a trick that they play to have their cake and eat it too. Yeah, I'll stop there. I think I'm over my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha, for your profound insight. I truly appreciated how you framed Western psychiatry and other psych disciplines as fragmented and contradictory. And with these rifts, it exposes vulnerable points that we can, as a collective, target to challenge embedded colonial practices as a way to dismantle the system. So your contribution is deeply valued. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. The next question is for Idil. What does it mean to be active in liberation struggles, knowing your mental health or disability can be weaponized against you? How do ableism, sanism, and anti-Blackness contribute to the pathologization of resistance?
Thanks so much. I think folks have actually spoken to a bit of this before, so I may just be a little bit briefer. But the question actually made me think about how people have historically responded to unlivability. And more recently, I think we've seen some examples, and it was drawn on already, the example of Aaron Bushnell's political response to what he experienced as intolerable and unlivable was framed only and solely as mental illness. And this was despite his really clear and well-documented articulation of why he chose to take those actions, and the actions being to self-emulate, right? So when I think about how mental health is weaponized in the context of liberation struggles, it makes crazy any and everything, right? Like I think that, and I think maybe just to quickly draw on what Sasha said was as we, when we think about the kind of possibilities around what some of these framings are and what the fragments are, the fragments do certainly offer possibilities that we can engage and think about how we can subvert. I also think that we do have to take seriously to some degree the heft in which pathology and sanism weighs, right? And like what it actually produces in the world on people. And many times I think what it produces more often is the limiting and narrowing of how we understand particular responses and ways of being and living in this world, right? So again, just to go back to the example, we think about what happens is how that's weaponized in liberation struggles. And for those people who may identify in this way, Again, the idea of always and only ever crazy. You are sort of dysregulated if you have too much emotions, if you display, for example, too much empathy. You're craziest if you resist suffering, I think. And I think that like folks have done a really good job of describing what that looks like, whether it's here in Turtle Island, whether it's in Palestine, whether it's in Congo, Sudan, Myanmar, etc. Or whether it's even in the description around the refusal of our engagement with these particular kinds of practices, right? So you're crazy, period, and you're crazy either way, especially for feeling the need to be able to respond, right? And so when I think about the second part of the question around sort of Satanism and anti-Blackness, Satanism and anti-Blackness operate in ways that are intertwined and distinct, but seek to produce a same outcome with different stakes. And so what I mean is that white supremacy dictates that we respond differently when race, racism, and anti-Blackness manifest alongside experiences of madness or mental health otherwise. For example, in the city that I live in, you have a higher likelihood for mad identified people, Black mad identified people, are those assumed. And I think this is a really important distinction around race and anti-Blackness particularly, and I think can maybe potentially be drawn as some parallels with the example of other folks as well. But that what that produces is death for people. And so essentially, you know, when folks are interacting with the mental health system, we see that they end up in many cases getting fatally shot. Those are Black people getting fatally shot, getting killed by simple interactions of quote unquote wellness checks. We see similar kinds of responses within Indigenous communities here in Canada, so-called Canada. And so a myriad of issues produce the response by police, but certainly central to these ideas is the fear of Black people. And to be clear, as we've witnessed on numerous occasions, and as Frank Wilderson actually describes in his book, Afro-Pessimism, quite well, is that it's not only police who are deputized to kill Black people, but it is all people, and in particular, white people, right? And so when we think about the idea, again, both what Sama has shared earlier, what Sasha has shared, what Hannah has shared, and Gina has shared as well, has been this idea around the killing of the settler, right? The killing of the native, my apologies, right? And how that happens at any and all cost. And so anti-Blackness functions in a way that always and only seeks to make Black people the kind of crazy that makes us dangerous. It is a specified Black crazy that authorizes and underscores every possible egregious act inflicted on us that makes it acceptable and always lawful. It then becomes the conduit to producing Black people into all kinds of wildly crazy people that get us killed, right? And that makes us sick enough to require the most kinds of intrusive forms of quote unquote treatment. Yet we are never reliable or sound enough to be trusted when we share our experiences, our quote unquote symptoms, and we're never sick enough, to get compassion in terms of care. So essentially, anti-Blackness doesn't just make us crazy regardless of diagnosis. It makes us the wrong kind of dead-deserving crazy who are expected to endure whatever consequences and have nothing to say about that in the name of sanity, okay? Specifically in the name of sanity. If you're sane, you have to shut up. Okay, you can't emote, you can't sort of be upset about these things. And so when I think about how this extends, oh, I see that's my time. Okay, okay, I'll leave it I'll leave the last part for after. Thank you, I'll end there, thanks.
Thank you, Idil, for bringing attention to the critical issues surrounding anti-Satanism, ableism, anti-Blackness, and how the carceral systems criminalize mad communities. And particularly, I resonated with your illustration of psych fields using a narrow perspective or a cultural minority that oppressively limits how the depth of human experiences. So your insight sheds light on the intersecting layers of oppression faced by marginal groups within the mental health industrial complex. Thank you for your contribution. And this leads well into the next question for Gina. What are the long-term consequences of pathologizing not just an individual, but an entire group of people? What role can mental health practitioners / providers play in fighting back against these dynamics?
Yeah, thank you so much, Gina speaking. So often practitioners, mental health practitioners within the system are reinforcing these dynamics. They're creating them, can very much operate as traders within the system to perpetuate the same tools of the state, which I feel like a lot of us have kind of said already, and that you're told, and I speak from the lens of being a therapist, and the implication is that your job is to correct the perceived deviance and defiance and label it as insanity. And that sanity is defined under capitalism as being obedient, a good worker, following authoritative rules, and that the job of the clinician is assigned and trained to see the diagnostic statistics manual as the blueprint, and that the white man's theory as the foundation for understanding within Western psychology, which then leads me to thinking about how being queer was seen as a mental illness in the DSM until 1973. The conversion therapy was introduced into Western psychology by a German psychiatrist, and that the ongoing pathology of queer and trans people still exists today, and that the psychological torture that goes into convincing you that your entire existence goes against human nature is within the framework of this type of colonial, cis-het, patriarchal logic. And that our queerness and transness becomes pathologized to legitimize the state violence that already exists against us, which then again reminds me of what Samah was saying about how the mental health system is within the larger system at play, like they are both working together. And that the goal has always been to control the narrative for anyone who defies the status quo or who dares to exist outside of these rigid binaries that then label us as unwell, mentally ill, etc. And which then brought me to thinking about this TikTok ban that the United States is trying to implement, for example, because we know that as an app, right, like it's like function to bridge so many worlds and so many people together, and that knowing that it is very much censorship and ultimately attacking us for exposing the lies that we've been fed by mainstream news outlets, specifically around the genocide in Palestine. And that TikTok has created the possibility to see horrors in real time, despite the accusation of TikTok creating conditions for us to be misinformed. And that not only do many people, specifically Gen Z and Gen Alpha, use this digital platform to become more politicized, they're also a generation who are some of the most mental health informed. And so this, and specifically that this group critically examines oftentimes the intersection between mental health and the violent systems that are at play that create and influence and shape our mental health, and that banning TikTok is ultimately about silencing political dissent and also manufacturing consent. And that the assumption that youth, specifically who are operating within this bracket, are assumed by fascists to already be increasingly mentally ill for the ways in which they are politically inclined. And so the second half of the question around like what role can mental health providers play in fighting back against these dynamics is we have to see how we consciously and unconsciously participate in this by virtue of our work and how we are placed within the system, and that the mental health system was not created because it has the people's best interests, especially people who have been historically colonized and oppressed, but it has the state's best interest and the interests of the ruling class. And that a depoliticized mental health provider is actively hurting their clients because we're taught to remove ourselves as agents in the room, and ultimately rebranding neoliberal ideology within a mental health paradigm, despite that there is no real trauma-informed framework or relational framework that can exist without the acknowledgement of political trauma and the ways in which all of these issues are connected. And yeah, I often also see that mental health providers do not seek their own mental health support from folks who work within this lens. It becomes a deeply intellectualized and disembodied practice in which it is purely based on theory versus praxis. And this came up also around the fact that so many people are afraid to talk to their therapist about, like in Western society, afraid to talk to their therapist about Palestine. It's similarly to the way that so many people are afraid to tell their therapist that they're suicidal and that they have suicidal ideation. That it's illuminating that there's an enormous disconnect between the real issues that people experience on a day-to-day basis, and forgetting that the personal is political and that the political is personal, and that it remains very much ideological. And that whoever the mental health provider is in the room is not a neutral figure in this equation, that their politics and their values and alignments show up in how they impact the client and the person in front of them, and that decolonial mental health care is to support us to create a more embodied community to weave our personal and collective liberation together.
Well, thank you so much, Gina, for this response. I really loved your discussion of psychology defining sanity through the lens of capitalism and neoliberalism. And I also appreciated how you paralleled how the mental health industrial complex operates similarly with how the media operates. Through manufacturing consent, and also through the TikTok ban, through controlling the narrative to function as the architect of the colonial state. Thank you so much. The next question is for Hannah. In these times of mass colonial violence and genocide, what does an anti-colonial abolitionist approach to care actually look like? And what role does community play in our own resistance?
Thank you. Before I answer that question, I just wanted to talk to Dr. Samar real quick. And she had mentioned that the Palestinian folks don't quite have a word for what they're experiencing with the ongoing genocide. And it's not quite PTSD, and you're still searching for a word, as well as the ongoing gaslighting within the media. And I think Native folks have somewhat coined a word that comes somewhat close to explain maybe what your people could be experiencing as what our people are now currently can maybe push through. And that word is called a soul wound, which is also kind of linked to historical trauma, but that's the closest we can kind of come to, at least for a word in English that can describe the pain of losing your land, your loss to the plants and the animals and the water and culture. And at least for our people, we've lost many tribes have lost their language. Anyway, so now I'll go back to the question. And what was my question? Okay. Now I know where I want to go with this. Sorry, I wrote notes and such, but I always feel so intimidated because the rest of the panelists, y'all are so prepared. And I think I'm prepared, but I just get a little nervous from time to time. And so when I think about the current medical healthcare system we have, it's so focused on Western and European ideals of wellness, which I think are actually fairly unattainable in a sense. Like nobody can be completely cured or completely sound. I think we all have very scary thoughts here and there and go through just so many tumultuous things in our life that there's no quite way to just live like a very straight and structured life. Especially if you're part of a BIPOC or other marginalized community, there's no such thing as like stability for us necessarily, because we're constantly living within systems of oppression and racism, and perhaps for some of us even poverty. But anyways, as I was reflecting on this, I was really trying to think of, at least from my family's perspective and my people's perspective. And I couldn't help but not talk about the boarding school era just because it's played such a large part within my life. I would say even well before the Indian Removal Act, which was when our land was being sold to settlers in this country. And we were essentially, many tribes had their various experiences of the long walk. I know both of my nations did, the Tohono Nation and the Navajo Nation. We experienced some mediation of that. And those stories are still passed on orally. And it isn't until now, in like 2010s, when the Navajo Nation sat down and actually orally was able to pinpoint some of these instances of the long walk and people that died and children that died and what happened. Just because we're come from people that speak about these things orally versus writing them down. That's almost like a very I don't know, maybe that could be controversial if I say it's a Western concept, but anyways. But I was also thinking of the boarding school era and the things that like my grandparents experienced. Specifically, there were instances of sexual abuse, lots of physical abuse. And when I went to Sherman Indian High School, and this was in 2015, that me and all the other youth there, we had to clean the children's graves, the unmarked graves of children that died at boarding school, at the hands of whether it was the people that worked there, and they were typically like former army folks, like army military folks that were working there running the school to essentially, I guess the term is kill the Indian and to save the man. My great grandpa actually ran away from one of these schools. I think he was like 13 years old when he ran away, and it was him and a group of kids. So we were on the Navajo Nation, and this school was on the White Mountain Apache Reservation, and that was a 150-mile trek, and it took these kids like a month to get back home. And some died, and some were able to come home. And my grandpa did that twice. So he ran away from the school twice, and if you were caught, you were immediately killed. And to do that twice, I think the risk, it shows the extreme like mental abuse that went on at these schools. In addition to that, the sicknesses that were there, children often died of TB, other forms like influenza, things that now we currently have vaccines for. And so I think to know about these times, and then for me to having gone to one of those schools, of course it's not as it was back when my grandparents went, or even like my mom when she went, but to know the weight of the experiences that my people collectively shared, and to, I think, even to exist nowadays, and to, like, I currently live in Phoenix, Arizona, and there's a street called Indian School, and they since have turned one of those boarding schools into like a park where I take my son to play often. But I think about that, and I think about how like my people's history, Indigenous history, has just been washed over. It's been memorialized, yet we're modern day people walking around and we still carry this pain, or what could be referred to as the soul wound. I think that that I carry and my people carry. Anyways, so I think what propelled me to want to get into this work was, one, recognizing that so many of our community members are struggling with mental health disparities. I think I went on to study like psychology and gender and women's studies, and I was like so gung-ho. I was like, yay, Sigmund Freud. But I think over time, having to really do that like deep decolonial work and say, whoa, if I were to follow things like that these old school psychologists and psychiatrists are proposing, that I would just be inflicting way more harm onto my people and other communities. And so I had to really sit with that. And I think the one thing that's always pulled me out of very rough times, and continues, I think, to pull these Native people out of these hard times, is definitely culture and community. And I also recognize that not all nations have access to their culture or community because they've been wiped out, whether it's by the boarding school era, the Indian Relocation Act, the Indian Removal Act, all of these federal policies that have been imposed upon us. And I think that Indigenous people, at least here in America, and also mean like Canada and Mexico and South America, or in Hawaii as well, we're just like picking up the pieces of what was left over. And so it's incredibly hard, I think, to see now the Palestinian people going through what our people went through. And And we're still living with that pain. And I think all people who are colonized will continue to live with that pain. Anyways, okay, I think my time's up, or almost up. But let me just end with this one quote by John Trudell, who's like my favorite activist from the American Indian movement, in which he says, "We are not Indians, we're not Native Americans, and we're older than both concepts. We're the people and we're the human beings." And it took me some time to really understand what this means, but I think it's truly sitting with that. We are all human and we all have that humanity deep within us, and it's up to us to really tap into that and remember exactly who we are. Okay, I pass it on.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for discussing the importance of the soul wound and sharing your lived experiences at the boarding school and cleaning the graves of those who passed, and sharing what your grandparents underwent in these oppressive environment. And I think it's important when engaging in this work to uplift these stories and to use these as a way to guide our resistance. So I wanted to put it out there to see if anyone for the next few minutes wanted to add any additional thoughts to what they discussed before. If there are no additional comments or remarks, we could just go to the last question that is for everyone. What concrete actions can we all take now to fight back against this kind of repression as activists, survivors, educators, practitioners, and community members?
Maybe I can say something about this question. If I may.
Yeah, feel free.
I think it's very important to challenge hegemonous mental health. I think the vast majority of mental health literature is written from the point of view of a minority in the world, a Western dominant minority. And the experiences that best capture the science, the knowledge that best captures the experiences of the vast majority of the global South are not expressed in science. And I think we need to work on generating more knowledge from our distant zones in the world and try to create more presence in academia and bypass the so many obstacles for people from the global South to publish and generate knowledge from their experience. I think this is important, and sometimes struggles and crisis time can be an opportunity to do this. And now it's time to try to generate knowledge from Palestine, but Palestinian mental health professionals are overwhelmed with what they are experiencing. And I think the experience creates many questions about how can we respond to this unprecedented experience, unprecedented events. What would be our mental health response? And I want to say that as a leading person in the field of mental health, I feel that I just need to sit and watch what people do We need to be humble and observe. And I see people going back to be grounded in their spirituality, in their national values, in their faith, and collective work and symbolism. Because people don't find accurate words to describe their experience, because the experience is so overwhelming, and people don't find words, so they try to express it in a symbolic way. And let me finish with one last anecdote. I want to say that 2002 we had there was a massacre in Jenin, 2002, and the Palestinians youth who lost their fathers in the attacks on the camp of Jenin, they built a horse from the debris of ambulances. And the horse, the Jenin battle horse, with pieces from ambulances, told the story of this attack on the health system. Now there is a huge attack on the health system in Gaza. The horse was recently confiscated and damaged by Israelis, damaged and taken away, arrested, confiscated by Israelis. The horse was the effort of the people to create a symbol, to tell the story of what happened, to tell the story of an unspeakable episode of Palestinian history. And it was damaged. This shows us also another obstacle to the healing process that people try to do on their own. I think we need to go back to our symbols and try to express ourselves in symbols whenever there is oppression, whenever there are limitations on the freedom of speech. Symbols become very important, and these processes should be encouraged in any oppressive situation. Thank you.
I'll say a few words. Thank you, Samada. That was I want to kind of just offer some underscoring or supplements to what you already said, really. I don't have too much more to offer. But I want to direct some comments maybe specifically to like mental health professionals or people who work in the field of mental health. I think it's the minimum ask is to have mental health professionals immediately call for a permanent ceasefire and offer symbolic and material support to the mental health workers, hospitals, and other emergency services that are in Palestine. I think they can stop trying to make grand pronouncements and simplifications about their understanding of what people may or may not be going through, and simply oppose occupation in a political sense. To kind of underscore that, I started with a quote from Fanon. I want to end with a quote from Fanon. There's an essay called Medicine and Colonialism. I think it's in the book Toward the African Revolution. I might be wrong though. But he says, introduced into Algeria at the same time as racialism and humiliation, Western medical science, being part of an oppressive system, has always provoked in the native an ambivalent attitude. The ambivalence is in fact to be found in connection with all of the occupiers' mode of presence. And then he goes on to say, when the discipline considered concerns man's health, when its very principle is to ease pain, it seems clear that no negative reaction can be justified. But the colonial situation is precisely such that it drives the colonized to appraise all the colonizers' contributions in a pejorative and an absolute way. The colonized perceives the doctor, the engineer, the school teacher, the policeman, the rural constable through the haze of an almost organic confusion. I think this kind of just helps us to arrive at us at a really basic truth that until the occupation is lifted, until the bombardment ends, until the checkpoints and movement controls are abolished, until the people are well nourished and cared for, foreign mental health aid will and probably should be looked upon with a certain amount of suspicion, as if it was a gift from the US, who is part of the funding the bombardment in the first place. And in the end, it will be a Band-Aid on an open wound, and a wound that is continually being reopened, especially when done by foreign agencies, as I said, without commitments to the immediate need of disoccupation. I think there's also in the United States context, it's incumbent upon mental health professionals to, for instance, if your hospital, like here in Minnesota, in the biggest hospital in our urban setting called HCMC, if you find that they're giving trainings on excited delirium, which is a diagnosis that seems to only appear on the record when it comes time for a mental health professional to be called in to excuse a police officer for murdering a Black person. If you see that they're giving trainings on excited delirium, this should be made public, should be called out. And in 2020, a group of mental health professionals at HCMC made this public and clear. And now, just last week, the trainings are now banned. So there's a way to have an effect here. Also, if your profession produces knowledge, or if one of your colleagues is in some way participating in a countering violent extremism program, or is lending knowledge towards, producing knowledge towards means that are being used to either justify or increase the effectiveness of torture, you might want to rethink your profession, or rethink the kinds of knowledge that you're producing in your profession. Because, well, I don't have to say why. I think I will end with that, and thank you for the time.
I can also answer the last question now. I think though, when I think of concrete action, I think one, land back, and by which I don't mean that Indigenous people, we would violently take back our lands and then kick everybody out. That's not what we mean as far as land back. I think it's healing the land, as well as taking our resources. I don't want to say taking our resources back. Maybe that's not quite the right word. I'm going to go more so with healing our resources when I think of like global warming, toxic pollution. I'll go to a place like Palestine and I look at all of the wreckings and such caused by the bombings. And so I think of healing those lands, and as Indigenous people, we acknowledge all things are living, which includes the earth, the water, the air as well. And in addition, I think being very real and open about the ways in which the lands you live have been colonized, which people have been displaced for you to benefit from their displacement, or even maybe no longer existence. In addition, I'm also being called to renounce colonial borders, myself being from a nation that exists along a colonial border and having experienced the policing and militarization, of course, not as intense as Palestine, but I do think acknowledging those borders is also giving power to those borders. And I'm thinking like nationalism, you know, being called to be what is an American. I don't really identify as an American. I identify as my tribal nations. So I'm just sitting with that. And as far as the mental health field is concerned, I think centering community therapy is a very individualized approach to healing. Real healing is going to come from our community, as well as acknowledging and bringing back our traditional medicines. I was always told by elders within our community what was lost can come back. And it might change and it might adjust to the times, and that's okay. Thank you.
I can maybe go next. It's Idil speaking. I don't think I have very much to add. I think everyone has already said a lot that's been very great and amazing. I think the only things that I would suggest in terms of maybe how we can think about responding or moving forward is to actually maybe go back to drawing on that fracture and complexity that Sasha, I think, began this discussion speaking about. And part of that, I think, is thinking about how it is that we deploy the very madness that they are using to suggest that we're mad already. Y'all, like, we're already mad. Like, we're mad, we're done for. They think that we're mad and angry and all kinds of crazy because we're fighting back, because we're speaking back, because we are feeling and emoting and coming in concert and in solidarity with multiple kinds of people. In this case, certainly Palestine. And so I guess one of the things would be just get big mad, get real mad and get big mad, right? Big mad, because what's at stake is our own sort of ethical sanity by not naming what's happening, right? So if it makes me crazy and ridiculous and wild to be angry and to stand against genocide and to be with and alongside Palestinian folks and other oppressed, marginalized people facing a genocide, well, I'm happy to be crazy. And I want to invite people to get crazier immediately, to get big mad and bigger mad. And in fact, to actually use that as a way to enact the rage that we are all feeling, the grief that we are feeling, right? I really want also to invite the folks that are still in the mental health system, working within the mental health system, to create spaces where when your patient or client says Palestine, says Sudan, says Congo, says occupied territories, that doesn't become the point where you get silence and your mouth gets dry. No, that should be the point where you say to the person, I want to talk to you about that. I want to talk about why I'm not going to turn my back and swallow my spit when people are dead, gone, and dying, right? So I want us to draw on these things while also, of course, keeping ourselves safe, but also realizing that the choice that we make to keep ourselves safe in some ways when we are witnessing other people dying, being genocided, is such a kind of a privilege, right? So I think, what does it mean for us to enact madness? What does it mean for us to animate madness, to animate refusals, to animate life, to animate choosing our comrades, right? Like, that's what I'm interested in. That's what I want to sort of push back and ask folks to do. I also want us to think about how, like, we allow saneism to show up in our organizing relationships to refuse the most radical action, because that person, they're too wild. You haven't thought about it. Like, stop, take breaks. Like, no, don't do this thing, right? So I want us to be really mindful of how we let that kind of saneism seep into and also de-radicalize us. And finally, I think that to really, for me, and especially as a Muslim woman, I think it's really important finally to underscore how Islamophobia, particularly here in like the location that I am, has always sought to put people underneath the prison, right? How projects and systems of radicalization function to make people not only a danger to the state, but then leave them in places where, we can never look back. Right. And so as we begin to think about how it is that we respond, I think we should prepare for the fact that not only are Palestinian people and Muslim people here right now alongside us, but we will continue to interact with Palestinian people from occupied Palestine, potentially from Gaza. And what are we going to do when we show up and are interacting with these folks, right? I also think that it is incumbent upon us. It is incumbent on us to name the oppressive occupier. It is incumbent upon us to name the occupier and to stand alongside all occupied peoples and to continue to fight in every way that we can, including, again, finally, getting big mad and big crazy, right? Like, that is the invitation, like, because we're going to be crazy anyway, right? So I think we should think about what we can do with that. So those are all my comments. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. So many like amazing things have been said. I'm like, what else do I say? It's yeah, all of that and just really like resisting this like bourgeois Western psychology like that is really, and not just in theory, but like literally like in practice, and a type of psychology that tries to like sanitize and numb and feed this avoidance, and like how fascism loves avoidance and it loves peace. And I can't remember who said this, maybe it was Kwame Ture, but that the white man's word is peace and ours is liberation. This idea that like we are trying to keep the peace by staying quiet, by not disrupting, and really this idea of like leaning into madness and challenging the sanism that is coming in within how we're understanding like each other. And I think that like the way that psychology is spreading even within like this idea of like pop psychology, these like really like bite-sized posts and things that we see like on social media that are really just like more hyper individualistic, like you, again, you are the center of the world, you are the most important person, like this is going to disturb your peace, this is going to rock the boat, and really like challenging that as the basis for how we're going to keep moving, and this principled commitment and organizing that we need to really like get organized and have it be again like material and not just like theoretical, and that principled commitments and organizing are not the antithesis to our positions as being mental health providers, despite the fact that the mental health system sets it up that way. And yeah, I mean, I should, again, like so much has been said. I really just want to echo the fact that material change is what's going to shift things. And in order to do that, we need community and we need each other in order to take risks. Often what I hear people say is their fear of taking risks has to do with feeling alone and feeling isolated. And so being able to connect with each other and having community is going to allow us to be able to take these risks that are necessary to dismantle and take these down, and also not just take it down, but also rebuild something and rebuild a world that's actually like worth living in, and not just from the Western perspective, like it's already said, but also taking into consideration and of course leading with global South struggles and how that informs and shapes how we move and how we're informed about it too.
Wow, thank you so much for everyone. I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed panelists for sharing their expertise and lived experiences with us so generously today. I am deeply thankful to everyone for their contributions in providing accessible education to the public and for sharing your wisdom and resources to inform and deepen our critical analysis. I also want to express appreciation to our audience for actively participating in this vital and timely conversation. And I hope that today's discussion has ignited a spark within us, urging us to continually explore decolonial approaches to mental health that prioritize collective liberation and authentic healing, particularly centering those most affected by systemic oppression. And I invite all us to join and support ongoing resistance efforts in all the forms that they can take, such as direct action, organizing, mutual aid, education, art, and more, by recognizing the power of solidarity and community and transforming mental health practice as we know it. Now I'm going to pass it to Noah for next steps.
Thank you so much, Kimberlee. I want to just thank you, Kimberlee, for your awesome moderation. And yeah, I want to thank our tech team who are behind the scenes, making everything super smooth. Of course, I want to thank all of our panelists. I'm feeling like on the brink of some hope with, you know, the uprisings happening in the US and colleges. This is just bringing that energy to me. So thank you all for all of what you shared tonight. Of course, to our Access team for making this event more accessible. Thank you so much to the committee of organizers who helped vision this panel, and for all of the participants for showing up. And I hope that you take with you some wisdom to energize you in actionable goals. So thank you for being here. So just to share what's next, we want your feedback. So we would love to hear how this event was for you. So yeah, please do that in the chat as you all are doing already. And in a follow-up email, we will also have the panel recording, the closed caption transcript, chat transcripts, the reading and resource list, and how to stay in touch with panelists, and the panel feedback form. We also really would love to have you join IDHA. As a member, you are joining our community of people who are having these kind of conversations and, you know, continuing to collaborate. So if you would like to join us, become a member, you can join the link in the chat here. So I would also like to take a moment to talk about the Transformative Mental Health core curriculum. This is one of our most recent kind of offerings in IDHA that's really bridging a lot of the conversations that were talked about today. It's our kind of core foundational training if you want to learn more about what transformative mental health is. And like I said, bridging the topics that were talked about tonight around mental health and oppression, around deconstructing, you know, the psychiatry and the disease model, thinking about it on a global level, thinking about different new kind of care strategies that can be incorporated outside of the formal mental health system, and so much more. So yeah, if you're interested, this is our self-paced curriculum. You can also join it through a learning experience with other people and learn together. And there's like a whole 50+ faculty talking about some amazing content around transformative mental health. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can check us out on our website. We have the link. I think Jesse will probably throw that link in the chat as well. And yeah, would love for you to join us and continue learning. We also would love for you to join us to our continued series that's happening this year called Topographies of Connection. And this is a live training series that is talking about the self, community, and land. And we explore a lot of topics that intersect really hugely with the discussions of tonight. So please join us for those. And we have the classes that are available here are some of them for that just already happened. We have the recordings for, so you can still get those access. And then we have our next class on May 5th called Creating Refuge from Psychiatric Force, Holding Space for Imagination in Community. So we also would love for you to stay in touch. Besides becoming a member, you can check us out on our website. This is all on here, our website, our Instagram, IDHA_NYC, our Twitter, which with the same, and our Facebook, IDHA.NYC. That will also be in the chat, but would love for you to continue connecting with us. And yeah, thank you so much again for all of our panelists and all of our participants and all of the team for tonight. And I can't believe it, in the one in the history of decarcerating care, we might be ending early, but Jesse just threw the feedback form in the chat as well. We would love to get your feedback about the tonight's event. So with that, I think we can take down the slides, and yeah, panelists, feel free to, just say goodbye or wave, and we can sign off early. I can't believe it. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Sapor. Thank you.